Hey there guys, so I'm here with a review for the recently released movie Accident Man. I just got done watching the movie. This movie was directed by Jesse V. Johnson and stars Scott Adkins as part of an assassin guild. Now, I saw the trailer to this movie a couple of weeks ago and I was really hyped. There was a few things about this movie that stood out to me. First of all, it's an action comedy with martial arts, which is already there. That ticks one of the boxes. That sounds like a movie that's made for me. But also, the cast of this movie really intrigued me. Now, the lead role, Scott Adkins, who is most well known for his portrayal of Yuri Boyka in the Undisputed series, some of my favourite martial arts movies, which I plan to review on this channel one day. I'll get those reviews in at some point. But also, Michael J. White is in this movie, another good martial arts actor who's also in one of the Undisputed movies. And also in this movie, Ray Park, who is most well known for his portrayal as Darth Maul in the Star Wars series. So naturally, this sounds like a movie that was made for me, so I had to see it. So I recently saw the movie, and how is the movie? Well, while it delivers in quite a few of its areas, while I did have a blast watching the movie, I did enjoy it, I have to say, I left the movie disappointed. I was disappointed by certain aspects of this movie, and I'll get into that later on in this review. But first of all, let's talk about some of the positives. First of all, as you would expect from a movie with a cast like this, that the combat and the martial arts scenes in this movie are fantastic. Okay, that there is plenty of action in this movie. If you like a good action flick like I do, then you will enjoy this movie, guaranteed. There's a heck of a lot of fighting. There's a heck of a lot of different martial arts styles. For those of you who don't know, Scott Adkins has a background in kickboxing and taekwondo, so that obviously helps him with his stunt coordinations and whatnot. And there's one fight scene in particular in this movie that I have to mention right away as being one of the standouts, where there's a scene that takes place in a dojo where Scott Adkins takes on Michael J. White and Ray Park at the same time, and let's just say that there's a few moves in there that I noticed that were a reference to Undisputed 2, where of course Michael J. White and Scott Adkins were rivals in that movie and they fought twice, so there was a few references there that I liked that were quite cool. And so yeah, obviously the martial arts, the stunt work, the overall choreography, the cinematography in this movie was really surprisingly good for a movie that isn't really that well known. So yeah, I enjoyed the cinematography, I enjoyed the combat, the martial arts, all that stuff. The action in the movie is fantastic. There's also a fair amount of humor, however, that kind of brings me to some of the negatives with the movie, which I will get into. But let's talk about a few of the things that bugged me about this movie, because honestly, midway through this movie, the whole experience for me kind of derailed. There was a lot of plot points and side plots that really were just so unnecessary. They could have done the whole movie without them, and let's talk about them now. So part of his motivations for this whole revenge plot surrounding this movie, that the movie jumps right into at some point, part of that motivation is surrounded by, or it's to do with his ex-girlfriend, who prior to the events of this movie left him for another woman. She became a lesbian. Now his ex-girlfriend, and he admits this himself in several expedition scenes, that his ex-girlfriend was a radical social justice warrior who just wouldn't shut up about the environment, this, that and the other. She was always going to rallies, she was always campaigning about stuff against government and whatnot. And while he was annoyed by this, he was obviously in awe and in love with this woman, and just couldn't see past any of her faults. And like I mentioned, she left him for another woman, which is something that this movie lingers on way too much. I'm not against the idea of that being a plot point, but the fact that the movie used this character, who we don't interact with at all, his girlfriend, they use this character as the sole motivation for what Scott Adkins' character does in this movie. And it's kind of hard for me to explain without you guys having seen the movie first, but it doesn't make any sense. What I'm talking about is this whole plot point with the ex-girlfriend and Scott Adkins wanting to avenge what happens to her. And minor spoiler here, the ex-girlfriend gets killed. We don't see this happen. It's explained through expedition scenes and whatnot. the whole thing about him trying to get revenge for what happened to her in the context of this character to me didn't make much sense, because this is a guy, and we see this through flashback scenes, that this is a character who has no empathy. This is a guy who, by all intents and purposes, is a psychopath. Okay, there's a scene in the movie where he commits his first murder, which it shows you a flashback to when he was a kid, and he commits his first murder, and he basically says after committing this murder, I should have felt bad, but I didn't feel anything. So what that indicates is this man doesn't have a conscience. Okay, he has no conscience. He's a broken man. He's a man who has no morals whatsoever. Like the way he carries out his assassinations, it's very, very clear to me that this is a character that has no morals, that doesn't care about anybody but himself. Okay, this is a really, really selfish, really quite an evil individual, and I understood it. Okay, it made sense in the context of the story that this is the way his character is. But the fact that they fashioned a whole revenge plot surrounding the ex-girlfriend who left him for another woman, it just, I didn't buy it, guys. I don't buy it whatsoever, and it felt kind of tacked on to me, and I'll explain why in a minute. Basically, there's another scene very early on in this movie where he carries out one of his assassinations, and he's told to pick up the payment for this assassination himself, whereas usually he would get the payment through a contact or a handler, but his handler, sends him to pick up this payment himself, and of course, naturally, he gets double-crossed, and he almost gets killed, but of course he survives the encounter, and that puts him on the path to this revenge plot. That in itself seems to me like it should have been his sole motivation for this whole the whole shenanigans that takes place throughout the plot of this movie, all the explosive encounters between him and the other assassins and whatnot. This should have been the primary motivation for that. But instead, it's as if the writers of this movie wanted to appeal to a larger demographic, rather than people like myself who just want to see Scott Adkins and his friends fuck shit up. I just want to see some, martial arts and some real, a really, really intense action thriller. Instead, we had to get some, bullshit, cliche story about how, his girlfriend was killed and he has to avenge her. Ugh, I actually facepalmed at that. I really did. And that also leads to a few glaring, things that stood out about this movie that I didn't like too. Is some other things, like, for example, when Ray Park makes a comment about the ex-girlfriend and calls her a dyke, Scott Adkins gets pissed off at that and says, you can't say that, that's homophobic or something like that. I honestly, I facepalmed at that. And it says things like that a few times in this movie. And I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? This is a character that murders people for a living, a character who has no empathy, a character who, by all intents and purposes, is a psychopath. And he's getting pissed off over a few insensitive comments about gays. Seriously, like that blows my mind. That doesn't make any sense. It derailed the whole movie for me, and it kind of ruined the experience. Another negative about this movie, and this was probably the biggest negative of all, the movie has no idea what kind of movie it wants to be. It's like it has no idea whether it wants to be a comedy, whether it wants to be light-hearted, whether it wants to be dark, whether it wants to be a mixture of both. It just doesn't know. For example, like I said, the movie is advertised as an action comedy, which for the most part it is. And by the way, I have to commend Perry Benson, who's one of the actors in this movie who portrays one of the assassins, and he's hilarious. Every scene he's in is fucking hilarious. I have to say that. He is big up to that guy. He did a good job. He kept me laughing all the way through every time he was on the screen. But that's one of the other problems with this movie, because another subplot, and again, slight spoiler alert here, but another subplot is that he finds out that his ex-girlfriend was pregnant with his child, and the child, of course, was, murdered along with the ex-girlfriend. Really? In a movie like this that's supposed to be light-hearted, satirical, sarcastic action thriller, you want to add a dead baby storyline into the mix? I mean, what does this story want to be? Is this, minutes after learning of this event, that this happened, that he had an unborn child that died, the movie's cracking jokes again. There are some really cheesy, over-the-top fight scenes, and it it feels to me like the writers, directors of this movie had no idea how to set the tone. They had no idea whether they wanted the movie to be taken seriously or if they wanted to make a fun, entertaining comedy action flick, that would appeal to action fans such as myself. It's like, who were they trying to appeal to with this movie? I really don't know. I mean, this is not a serious movie. This is not a movie that is taken seriously at all. So why throw a relatively serious plot point like that in there? It doesn't make any sense to me. But yeah, those were the negatives for me. There were just, a few inconsistencies with the character that I just couldn't get down with, and yeah, it seemed to me like they were trying to appeal to liberals, and in a movie like this, which is about a murderer, I got a similar vibe, and it had some similar issues to what the Hitman movie from 2007 had. You guys remember that movie where they tried to center the whole plot around a fucking woman, so around some whore who ends up in a pickle, and he tries to save her, and she becomes one of his motivations for going after revenge and going after his targets, even though the motivation was already there because he liked the character in this movie, surprisingly. I wonder if they picked up some plot points from that movie. Him like the character in this movie, Hitman was set up. He was set up after one of his contracts, and he then obviously has to go after the people who set him up, and that in itself was enough of a plot to go around. That was enough of a motivational reason for him to go for revenge. This movie, however, doesn't. And that movie too tried to center the whole thing around a woman, and they tried to make this woman, the main emotional reason for why he does what he does, and it didn't make any sense in that movie, and it doesn't make any sense here. Okay, I don't know why movies do this. I don't know why movies always try to appeal to demographics. They always have to have some love interest in there. He even has a few expedition scenes with the ex-girlfriend, who's another social justice warrior, lesbian woman who he comes across, and they were just so unnecessary, those scenes. They didn't need to be there. They could have done the whole movie without it. So overall, this is a movie I enjoyed. Like I said, there was a lot of action. The way that he goes around his assassinations, particularly early on in the movie, how he makes them look like accidents. And, even when the guy, sets him up and tries to kill him out of the blue, he still finds a way to make it look like an accident. That was hilarious. That was funny. That was it took me back to my days of playing the Hitman video games, where I used to try and make all the kills look like accidents. That's what I was getting flashbacks of during this movie early on. So look, the movie was fun. If you're into action flicks, you'll enjoy it. But there were just a few plot points I didn't agree with. I didn't like some of the inconsistencies with the characters. Like I said, the martial arts, the cast does a great job with what they have, but the problem in this movie is the writing and the direction. Those are some of the issues I had here. If they'd got a better director on board and some, more consistent writers who didn't have an agenda and who just wanted to make a good movie, the movie could have been better. So I'm going to give this movie, I thought about giving it a 5 out of 10, but I think that wouldn't be fair because of how much I enjoyed the action. So I'm going to give the movie a 6 out of 10, so slightly above average. Not a great movie, certainly not Scott Adkins' best movie by far. Certainly not, top 10 of my favourite action movies. I have a lot more action movies than this that I enjoy. So let me know what you guys think anyway. What do you guys think of this movie? You guys even bothered? Thanks for watching.